Hello there, Ben.
Hi there, how are you?
Good, good. Thanks very much for joining us tonight. Now, this is the first time you've been on the show, and we first found you on TikTok when we came across several of the videos that you were putting out, mainly speaking about what it was like to be a Scotsman living in England,
hmm
and also your opinions on matters, the sorts of matters that we talk about here on this show, which is to say keeping the United Kingdom together,
Sure.
which you were all for, Brexit, restriction of immigration and things like that. So you definitely came on our radar at a very early stage, about 18 months ago. Would you just like, by way of introduction to the viewers who won't have heard of you before, just
hmm
tell us how you came into the political topic of speaking about these things?
Yeah, sure. I never intended on being any sort of voice. However, I've seen the state of Scotland over the last 15, 16 years, and it was the pandemic when we seen that these emergency powers not given back to the people, and the lockdown protests. I ended up going to those and made a couple of videos on TikTok, which went up pretty big, and ended up speaking about sturgeon after those, and then it became something from there. It was an absolute accident, and that account actually no longer exists either. It was censored.
Okay. Any reason why TikTok would censor your accounts?
uh, for being pretty much outspoken. Things that might that hate crime act certainly would get me in trouble for, um, and I think that's what it was. The last thing that I posted was to do with the Gaza conflict, and then my account suddenly was no longer there. So to be quite honest with you, I'm not really interested in like numbers or things like that. It was a complete and utter accident there, and it's done me some good not being on that app anyway, because I'm not in the. I felt like I was in the thick of unbelievable amounts of negativity, and it became not a very nice place. That's for sure.
When you say under a lot of negativity, where was that coming from?
Usually from Scottish nationalists.
Mm.
They didn't like to know that their Führer Sturgeon wasn't who they thought she was, and yeah, just generally those people are people who don't seem to think for themselves. Quite honestly.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we've been on TikTok for at least a couple of years now, and I know what you mean about the negativity. Eventually, they tend to go away. They're kind of they swarm in and then they swarm out when they see they
Yes.
can't really make an impact upon you.
hmm It almost became a challenge. I was almost thriving in their negativity. It almost became a challenge to wind those people up, which was counterproductive to any sort of thing that I was talking about at the time. And I think that's what that app is designed to do. I called it a weapon once, and I really still stick to that to this day. It's a weapon on people's mind and consciousness, and it's definitely designed to pit people against people.
Interesting thoughts on it. Yeah, you could well be correct. This is saving grace as far as we're concerned is that it does allow different more views to be heard on it than, for example, on YouTube.
Sure.
You can hear, but these accounts often do get then taken off, but then people come back with them again. But there does seem to be a little bit more freedom of speech, as it were, on TikTok than there is on YouTube. However, I would say that there's a lot of bad stuff on TikTok as well.
hmm
We wouldn't go
Especially
quite so.
for the young children,
Oh yeah,
the dancing and the degeneracy, and it's being beamed right into their eyeballs.
yes, yes. And the more you watch a particular type of video, the more that gets shown to you as well.
It's
So
certainly one of the most aggressive algorithms out there on any of the
yes,
social media platforms. intentionally pushes exactly what you want. And if you want hate, it will give you hate.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people get lost in that, and I was becoming one of them. It was
Yeah.
becoming absolutely counterproductive to any of my beliefs or who I am as a person. Falling
Mhm.
for it just as much, yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's you. One likes to think that one's able to protect oneself from that sort of stuff, but you can, if you can sit back, you can see that you're just getting taken along with it as well. So yeah, it sounds like you've made the right decision. So, do you live in Scotland?
I don't. I actually live in England.
Right,
I've
right,
lived there
and
for just over a year now, and I can see myself living here for the rest of my days. For absolute certainty, I will be here for the rest of my days.
okay, crikey, crikey. Any particular reason why you'd be so determined about that?
I have nothing in common with the Scottish people anymore.
Right.
And in 1 year of being in England, I have more in common with these people than I ever have with a Scottish person. And to be quite honest with you,
Uh huh. Well, I mean, what's the main kind of difference then that you're finding? Like, if you moved down a year ago, what was the main impact that you found about England rather than Scotland?
I won't say what town I'm in, but I'll
No.
say that it's a historic town where the bricks are held together by pride, not mortar. That's what I'll say. The
Mhm.
people are very proud people. Flags, Union flags, all over the place. Not a pride flag to be seen.
Mhm.
Proud people, and it's a small town as well, so they're very community driven, and everyone knows each other, and it's like one of those movie set English towns that you see. It's exactly like that. It's almost a complete 180 from anything I've experienced in Scotland.
Right. 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 Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting to know. The problem with the Scottish nationalist debate is it was something that was always under the surface, and Scots got along fine with each other so long as you didn't talk about that. And when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, you were aware of that debate, but everybody's like, well, we're not going to go there because it's just going to create too much friction between people. And unfortunately, thanks to, well, whether it was inevitable or not, but certainly the Scottish Parliament gave that tendency a platform, and that brought about 2014, the referendum, which unfortunately caused a social division of sorts. And I don't want to overplay it, but it did definitely divide people to the point where some people started to look on each other as like, what side's that person on?
Yes. You almost became an enemy to your people unless you agreed with the nationalists. You became an enemy to your country and an enemy to your countrymen for daring have a difference of opinion.
Yes. Well, Derek, please don't move to England because we need you here to help us in Scotland. Which is actually one argument that I would say to people. Is like, if people say to me, oh, I'm thinking about moving, I was like, don't. Who's going to help a force for good?
I know the optics of fleeing a country. However, I felt like a refugee. I felt like I was being pushed out by these nationalists. Not that I'm saying that they had anything to do with me moving to England. That's obviously a joke. But you almost feel like anybody who is Scottish and feels like keeping this country together, come down here and see what you're missing. You'll be you'll be welcomed. You won't be treated like a second-class citizen in your own country, and the people actually care about each other.
Yes. Well, you're painting a very rosy picture there of England, but I should imagine there'll be parts of England which are considerably worse than living in Scotland as well.
Yeah, I'm very lucky to be in this sort of town. I know, like major cities and stuff are currently under an immigration crisis. In fact, it has started to appear here. It's not like this town's shielded from anything of the sort. In fact, it's the opposite. However, for now, it's on a good steading. It really could, it really is on a good steading. England's attitude towards Scotland, however, is absolutely positive. And that's one of the things that I've kind of surprised people with, is I'm not an Anglophobe.
Well, tell us about that then. England's attitude to Scotland, as you
Yeah,
see it.
there's actually a few families. They've moved down 10, 20 years ago as well. Not in this town specifically, but they do come to this town. They all said the same thing, that they would never go back to Scotland. The attitude of the Scottish people towards the England is, one of 1314. It's the one of the radicalisation programme they went through on the lead up to the Scottish independence campaign, with Braveheart being shown on their screens every single night. And it's the one that they seem to still believe is their reality. In England, however, all I hear about Scotland is how beautiful the place is and how lovely it is. I don't hear about politics. I don't hear about anything of the sort. I don't hear about independence all the time. Independence is like a bizarre concept to them, because they're fighting the same enemy, the Tory party. That's what they're fighting. Scotland, you're either with them or you're a Tory. In England, it's exactly the same, but with the Labour Party. You're either voting for the Labour Party or you're a Tory.
Yes, the Tories are the bogeyman for all the other parties, and everything is measured against the Tories as the ultimate, which is kind of ridiculous, really, because when you look at the policies now of Tory and Labour, I prefer the George Galloway phrase, the uni party.
Yeah, absolutely. Was just about to say the same thing.
Yes. Yeah. And so, I'm hopeful, perhaps, that the uni party might break, really, because I think it has to break. I don't hold any more to the idea that you've got to vote for one to keep the other out, because they're both going to be largely the same, and I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I did hear someone the other day say that they're voting out, they're not voting in, but it's one and the same thing. They're voting for the exact same thing, wrapped up in a different package. It's the same thing.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. No, I was just going to say, did you hear what I was talking about there regarding Humza's hate speech law?
Yes.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Scotland is one of 2 countries in the world where you can be jailed for speech, apparently. The other one being North Korea. That's not a great comparison. And I've said it before in a few videos, but I love saying it. Scotland's known for the greatest freedom fighting force the world has ever seen, but they've been succumbed to words and hurt feelings, and that's a real shame.
Yes, it is, and it's a lot to do with the devolved institution as well, and the fact that it allowed the people, such as the Greens, who are behind a lot of this, it allowed them positions of power. And because the Parliament itself wasn't really doing much else of particular importance, they were able to concentrate on all this kind of social engineering. They've had the luxury to basically sit under the power of the British state and just create all this devilment. The devil will find work for idle hands to do. Absolutely. As the phrase says, and as long as you are enjoying the largesse of the great British taxpayer, then you can sit and fiddle about with all this micro social engineering for the worst, and that's one of the reasons why we've got it in Scotland. Having said that, all of this nonsense as well comes also from the British government as well. I'm not saying it would be any better. And it's only marginally better at the moment. But it too will succumb to all of this nonsense.
I believe that Scotland is England's experiment. Not England as in the English people, but I do believe Scotland is used as a testing ground for many things. many
Mhm.
things, and
Mhm.
this will be yet another one of these things, because the idea of being like speech being policed is absolutely foreign to English people. They had no idea that that's even a possibility.
Yes. Yes. Yes, indeed. And what worries me as well is like how easy it is to get trapped into something like this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're a young person at school or.
Yeah, exactly. School playgrounds for sure are certainly going to be uh well, it's going to change anyway. It's definitely going to change now that they'll be armed with this power, where kids' education, their entire lives or futures will be destroyed by accidental speech, and that's not good. It's obviously not very good at all. A criminal conviction for something like hate speech, like you were saying earlier, that where it could be conflated with violence,
Mm.
is unbelievable. And these kids are actually being taught that speech is violence in some instances. America's certainly getting that. I know here, it's like that as well, where some places are teaching that speech can be violence. Some of these organizations are saying that speech can be violence, and that's absolutely insanity.
Yeah, yeah, and they make all sorts of convoluted arguments,
Mental
that
gymnastics.
mental gymnastics, to end up in a terrible place where somebody's dead,
Yes.
which is just not. Which, if that were the case, you couldn't go through life saying anything,
Yes,
lest
exactly.
lest you ended up doing that. So we do see them saying such things, and
One thing from being on TikTok I realized was the amount of people who are afraid to speak out in Scotland. The amount of people, the messages I would get saying that I'm saying things that they've wanted to say, and that kind of stuff, where they don't think they could speak out. But if you are like, people that are speaking out are now going to have to be in very extra careful, be extra territorial with what they're saying, essentially, because of, let's say, immigration, for example. Now we know it's all a hot topic right now, but what happens if someone gets offended by saying that there's maybe the country's maybe full?
hmm
Is that going to be policeable? Because all of that seems unpoliceable and unreasonable.
yeah. Well, if you was to say there's too many Syrians coming in on small boats,
Mm-hmm.
or too many people from Albania getting into the country, or something like that, that could be considered. And it doesn't need to be an Albanian that takes offence at this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if somebody heard me saying that on this show,
Yep.
and they said that, I find that to be insulting, and I find that to be racially prejudiced against Albanians. And what they would have to do, of course, is to prove that I intended to stir up hatred, or that it was likely to stir up hatred. So, as I mentioned when I was speaking about that, that is the connection that does have to be made.
Sure.
Okay, that's the leap that has to be made. But in this society, that's a fairly easy leap, unfortunately, for a lot of politically correct judges or
Yes.
confused jurors to make.
Because they're calling themselves reasonable people. But these people are anything but. What is a reasonable person? Who determines who's reasonable? Or what's reasonable? And unfortunately, the people that are going to be policing these laws and sentencing people are not that reasonable.
Yes, that's right. Reasonableness definitely changes with the times, and and it has no particular legal definition other than what is considered to be the societal norm. And so, if the norms shift to the point where even saying something like "there's too many Albanians coming across on small boats," if that
Mm-hmm.
that could be considered by some people to be likely to quote unquote stir up hatred, when of course there's no intention of doing that. It's just a matter of political fact that
Yes.
I would like to stop the number of people who are coming across in small boats, and I use the Albanian example because there's absolutely no reason on God's good earth why Albanians should be getting refugee status in the United Kingdom. Okay, there's nothing going on in Albania that they're needing to be escaping from, so that's a complete con that any of them are coming here. So I use that as an easy example, but the point is that anybody can get caught out on that. And we saw the recent example of the fellow Sam Milia who got done, and his stickers said things, just basic things that weren't in and of themselves even offensive, but clearly somebody found them insulting and considered that it was likely to or intended to stir up hatred, and he got 2 years for that in England. So
I think he was made an example of. It was almost used as the deterrent for, this is what will come to you if you dare speak against us or out about anything about that.
Yes, absolutely. Budgie Burger says too many illegals smashing up the free 5-star hotels. Yes.
Yeah.
So
when talking about the illegals, sorry, like, I think they're just equally being used as pawns by politicians as well. Like, people have to remember that there's a lot of hatred going towards anyone that's a different color, a different shade of white to them. It does go too far sometimes, where I still wouldn't agree with policing it. However, the rise in the media seems to be conflating a lot of racial hatred on the GB News in particular. It seemed to be drumming up a lot of racial hatred subliminally or off the cuff comments, etc. And it's given justification for people to then start being that way as well. But then you slap that kind of thing in front of them as well, then they can go to jail for it. When in their mind they might have only been speaking out for what their country, for their country. Now they're in jail for it.
That's a good point. And we need to help the people like ourselves who are opposed to basically the invasion of this country. We have to help educate them about what the laws involve and how their casual speak can actually catch them out in a very bad way. And
in England, English people use, just like Scots and English people, they're so similar. Like, that's one of the main things about living in England. What I've noticed is they're so similar, and football chants, and like you were mentioning, the idea that they could then be jailed for that is like, it just genuinely does not make sense to them. It doesn't make sense to them, and I think that's what it is for a lot of people. Like, policing speech, that's nonsense. Policing thought is actually what some of it reads like, actually.
Yes.
Thought policing.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it is a form of thought police. Thought policing. There's absolutely no question about it. Hate speech policing, and the big danger, of course, is that this gets conflated into as if it's a violent thing in and of itself.
And I'm not saying speech can't equate to, speech can't cause violence. Speech can obviously cause violence, but to equate speech and violence as one is essentially double speak. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it should be pointed out, of course, that if you incite violence, I mean, that's always been against the law. If you incite to a violent crime, that's against the law, and that should be against the law, because nobody should be doing that in our democracy. There's laws against that, and you can't say that is a political tactic in order to suppress debate. It's simply just keeping the law.
It's completely superfluous. One of the things in that as well is the abolition of blasphemy. The blasphemy law abolition. Godlessness is exactly why our country, or one of the reasons why our country is in the state that it's in. And immigration, everyone's a Muslim apparently, right? Well, Muslim people do go to the mosque, and they do follow their text. And right now they are doing Ramadan right now. And I keep hearing that English or British culture is being lost but it's been lost by our own people because they're not subscribing to what it is to be British. They want to say it's a white Christian country, then walk the walk. Because I'm not seeing a lot of men in the churches. What I'm seeing down here is a lot of churches that can't afford to get Bibles on their pews because nobody's walking through the doors. They're in the pubs instead.
Yeah, it's a good point. I hear that one of the advantages of this particular hate speech act was, well, at least it's abolished blasphemy. I was like, I'm not sure that's actually a good thing. I mean, I think we should be showing respect to certainly the Christian religion and passing respect to the heathen religions, as I like to call them, in my controversial way,
yes.
Whether or not calling those other religions heathens.
That might be now,
that might be from 1st of April. I may have to.
Yeah?
Yeah, I may have to.
I'm sure that will be clipped and used in Police Scotland's investigation.
Yeah. Ben, we need to get you back on. I think you make a great person here to bounce ideas off of. But it's the top of the hour. So,
sure.
Folks, do say a big thank you to Ben. If you want to follow him, he's on twitter.com/The White Opinion. And no doubt we'll be hearing from you. Go ahead.
But that's maybe another thing under Humza's law, that if I was to live in Scotland, it might get me locked up, is even the implication of my username on Twitter. The White Opinion.
Yes.
When it's actually about my surname.
Yes, indeed. Well, I'm sure Humza could do a whole speech on that, on white Twitter handles.
Yeah, oh yes.
Like the one he did recently.
In Hollywood,
okay.
Yes.
Yeah, good. Okay, Ben, fantastic to speak with you. And
thank you very much for your time, and everyone's time. Really grateful for that.
Absolutely, Michael. Ben, Catherine says, thank you, Ben, you were fantastic. Totally concur. Michael says, thank you. Derek says, great chat. Another great show. And,
awesome. And this
good
is
stuff.
A great show, Alistair. Like, what you've got going on is excellent. Like, it's really, really excellent. And that's one thing that I've seen on TikTok. It really caught my eye was how professional your show was, and how into it you are, and how into what you've got going on. That's really rare, man. People are usually just in this for themselves, and you really seem like you want to help people, and that's awesome.
Thank you very much for those kind words. And I couldn't do it without all the supporters here at A Force for Good, our assistant producer of this show, and our social media coordinator who helps especially on Facebook, as well as, of course, all the viewers who watch and who send in their comments and to share and like the program. So thanks all of you, and thank you, Ben. We'll have you back on as soon as you're available.
No problem.
And
Thank
so,
you again.
Good night.
No problem, sir.